Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to let our users create blog posts. Let's jump right into the action. Okay, so from the home page, imagine you're logged in. So Brad, Cordy. Cool. And now a logged in user would probably want to be able to use this button right about here to create a blog post. Now, currently this link just points towards a hashtag value, but instead, imagine we point towards, create post or some sort of URL that shows them a form where you type in a title and body content for a new post. Now, before we worry about saving blog posts into our database, let's first just worry about setting up that URL, that link, and that static HTML template for creating a new post. In other words, here's what I would do. In our source code, search for the web.php file. So controller command P, web.php, right? This is our routes file. And if we scroll down to the bottom, let me actually place all of these routes so they're next to each other. You don't need to, but if you wanted to, you could write a comment and say, these are all of the user-related routes. And then below that, down here, we could have, blog post-related routes, just to stay organized. And then let's set one up. So imagine route, uppercase route to use the Laravel class, : to use its get method, semicolon. We give it two things, right? So the first argument, the URL pattern, let's just say /create-post, right? So a GET request, you're not sending over any data yet. This is just visiting the URL, and you should be presented with the create post form, the HTML template. So for the B argument, let's say square brackets. And now up here, you can see we were always using the user controller. In this case, why don't we have something called a post controller, right? Or a blog post controller, and all of our blog post related methods can live inside that new controller. So to set that up, you can go in your command line. You can open up a secondary command line because our PHP artisan serve is already up and running in this one. So a second command line, and to create a controller, it would just be PHP artisan make : controller, and then just a space and make up a name. So I'm going to call it post controller, and that's just one word, post controller, but I just capitalized the C in controller. So post controller, press enter. Cool. So now in these square brackets, we know that we give that two things. So A, B. The first thing we give it is the name of controller. So post controller : class, and then instead of B, this would be the name of the method. So you could make up anything, pizza, unicorn. Why don't we call it maybe show create form? Okay, now before we save this, let's be sure to remember that we need to import the controller into this file. So you can just right click on our new post controller right here and choose import class. Awesome. Then up at the top, you can see it automatically added this line for us. Now we can go ahead and save this file. And now let's go into our new post controller and create a method with this name, right? Show create form. So in app and then HTTP controllers, there's our brand new file that Laravel created for us, postcontroller.php. So in the class, let's just have a public function. So public function, let's name it show create form. There's nothing special about this name. This is not a Laravel name. I just made this up. For now, let's just return a string of text that says hello with two exclamations, semicolon. Let's save this. And now let's adjust this create post button so that it points towards create post, right? So open up your controller command P, your layout blade.php file, and up towards the top, for me it's around line 25, but we're looking for a link, an A element, where the text is create post. So instead of the href being a hashtag, we would just say /create-post. Go ahead and save that, and now if you refresh while you're logged in, and then click the create post button, awesome, it takes us to create post, and there we see hello. So now let's just borrow the pre-existing HTML from HTML templates to actually show a form for creating a new post. So here's what I would do. In our source code, let's create a new view file. So in the resources folder, inside resources, then inside the views folder, I'm just going to right click on the views folder, choose new file, and let's name it maybe create-post.blade.php. Cool. Now in this file, let's use our layout component. So that'll get us, our global header and footer. So an HTML tag that looks like this, x-layout, have a matching closing tag, right? In the middle, this is where the unique content would go. Now, this is not a course about HTML and CSS. So right now, open up the HTML templates folder that we're borrowing code from. And you'll see that there's a file named createpost.html. If you jump into that file, just scroll down, and you can see around line 30 the header ends, and then around line 48 the footer begins. So in between the header and footer, I'm just going to select all of this, copy it into my clipboard, back in VS Code, in between X layout, just paste it in. Let's hit save. And now we just need to actually use this blade view. So go back into Post Controller, right? And instead of saying return hello, let's say return, call the view helper function, and the name is create-post, right? That's what we named our blade file. We can save that, and now if you refresh this create post URL instead of hello, awesome. So there's a field where you can type in a title, and then a field where you can type in the content, and then you could click, create or save new post. At this point, let's make this form come to life. So let's pay attention to where this form would be submitting to. So if we go back into create post blade.php, towards the top we see form, the method is post, that's great, but the action, instead of hashtag, let's just make up a URL. So /, and it can actually be the same thing. It could be create-post, because even though that's the URL for showing the form, this is a GET request, right? The browser is sending a GET request just to view this page. If the browser sends a POST request to this same URL, that's an entirely different route. So here's what I would do. Back in the HTML, yes, the action can just be /create-post. You could make up a different URL, but let's use this just so you and I are on the same page. And now we know that whenever you perform a POST request, inside the form you need to say @CSRF. Cool. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now go into your routes file, so web.php, and we just want to set up for this same URL pattern, but we want it to be a POST request instead of a GET request. So just duplicate this line, and then on the new copy, change this to POST. And then instead of show create form, let's make up a different method name. Let's call it maybe store new post. So let's go ahead and save this, and then let's just go create a method in our controller with this matching name, right? So I just made up a name of store new post. So in our post controller, maybe right above or below this public function, you would just say public function store new post, parentheses, curly brackets. Just to make sure we've connected the routes together, you could return a string of text that says, hey, 3 exclamations, give that a save. And now do be sure to refresh this so it's pointing towards the correct submit URL. But if you refresh and just click save new post, perfect. It takes us to the correct URL. So now from this method, instead of just returning hey, we would actually want to store something in the database, right? A new blog post with whatever values the user chose. That's great, but there's only one problem. In our database, in MySQL Workbench, right? Yes, we have a table for users, but we haven't created a table yet for blog posts. And remember, Laravel created the users table for us. Yes, we adjusted the migration file, but it created the migration file for us in the first place. So this is a fun moment. This represents the first point in the course where we need to create our own totally brand new custom database table. So a migration, and then we're also going to need to set up a model that is an easy to work with metaphor for that new table. So let's start with the migration. We need to create a migration file and basically tell Laravel that, hey, we want a new table, and we can name it posts for blog posts, and it should have, the certain columns like an ID. It should have a column or field for the title of the blog post, for the body content of the blog post. It should have another column to keep track of which user created or authored the post, so on and so forth. So to create a brand new migration file to spell out the table details like that, here's what we do. I need you to jump into your command line. We already have this secondary command line open, and run this with me. PHP artisan make : migration, and then a space, and then just make up a name. Create underscore posts underscore table, right? Create post table, all one word, just separated with underscores. Press enter. Okay, now what did that do? Well, if we look in our database folder and then migrations, Laravel created this brand new file for us. So it'll have the timestamp and then the name we chose, createposttable.php. If you open up that file, this is really cool. So not only did Laravel create a new file in the right folder for us, but it included all of this boilerplate code. So in this up function, you can see Laravel is already going to create a table for us with this name, posts. It's already included code for the ID column. It's already going to include timestamps, which will keep track of the date and time for when you created the post or you last updated the post. And then if you scroll down a little bit, Laravel has also already set up the down function so that if you ever wanted to roll back this migration, it's going to drop or delete the table for you. Cool. What we need to do right now is just adjust this up function a little bit. So instead of just these two columns, we want to add on a few additional columns. So for example, let's add a column for the blog post title. So $table dash greater than, and it would just be a string. So call the string method, and let's name it quotes, title, semicolon. Let's also add a long text field for the actual body content. So, $table dash greater than. Instead of a string, you could say long text, just so the users can include a lot of characters in the value. And we can give it any name we want, but why don't we name it body? Okay, and then finally, let's add a column that keeps track of which user is creating or authoring this post. So $table dash greater than. And the type for this, it's not an ID or a string or a long text. It's a type called foreign ID. And the I is uppercase, but the D is lowercase. Foreign ID, semicolon. Now in these parentheses, here's what we do. We say quotes, and then I'll explain what this value means in just a second, but it's going to be user underscore ID. So Laravel will see this, and it will know that what comes before the underscore, so user, that's the name of the model in the table that we're trying to look at, and then whatever comes after the underscore, that's the name of the column or the field. So in other words, whoever creates or authors a blog post, that user is going to be represented by this value, right? If you go into your users table, I just have, well, actually, let me refresh. I have two users now, right? Brad and Barks-a-lot. But Brad has an ID of 1, Barks-a-lot has an ID of 2. So this ID value is key here. So if the Brad user creates a blog post, we would store the author as just a value of 1. Cool. Now, if you wanted to, at the end of this line, before the semicolon, you can say dash greater than and call a method of constrained. And what this is going to do is Laravel won't even let you create a blog post if the author value that you provide here doesn't actually exist in the users table. In other words, you couldn't provide an author value of 999 if there is no user with that matching ID in your database. So it's just a little extra integrity check if you want to have that. You can also do some pretty cool things. So for example, we're not going to have the ability to delete a user account in this course, but let's say if Brad had 10 blog posts, but then you deleted the Brad user account, you could have that delete action cascade so that when you delete the Brad user, all 10 of his blog posts get deleted automatically. You would do that by, after constrained, you could say dash greater than and call, on delete, and then set this to cascade. Anyways, with all of this in place, we can save this file. And now to make this actually take effect in our database, we just go to the command line and you would run this command with me. Say php artisan migrate. So we can just press enter. And if you go into Workbench, if you click this refresh icon, awesome. You can see in our tables, we have this brand new table called posts. And if you click this icon, we don't have any posts yet, but here you see all of the columns or fields that we could want. At this point, let's add code to our post controller so that we actually take the values that the user types into these fields and we actually save that into a new database record when they submit the form. So let me show you how I would do that. Let's go into our post controller and we're interested in this store new post function. So first of all, in these parentheses, let's say uppercase request and then $ lowercase request. And then in the body of our function, let's make up a variable. I'll call it incoming fields equals $request, and then we're going to call the validate method. In these parentheses, we give it square brackets. And let's just say that the title is required, comma, and the body field, that is also required. Cool, so if you leave one of those blank, we're not even going to move forward. Okay, and then before we actually save anything into the database, I want to strip out any HTML tags that a malicious user might try to add. So what I would say is incoming, $incoming fields, look inside the array for the title, and I would just set that to equal, and then call the PHP strip tags function, semicolon, and then just feed that the original value. So $incoming field, square brackets, title. Just duplicate that line, do the same thing for the body value, and then change this to body as well. And actually, first, before we save it into the database, let's spell out who the author, or the user ID of this post. So we would just add something onto this array. I'm going to say incoming fields, square brackets. I'm just going to add on a new item, and the label can be user_ID, right? Because that's what the name of our column is. This is whoever authored the post. And instead of just setting this to 1 for Brad or 2 for Barks-a-lot, to make it dynamic, let's just pull the user ID value from the current session. So whatever user is logged in, right? If it's Brad, we want this to be 1. If it's Barks-a-lot, we'd want it to be 2. But essentially, you would just say, call the auth helper function, look inside that, and then call the ID function, semicolon, and that'll get us the dynamic user ID value. Cool, so now we have this array called incoming fields, and it has everything we need. It has the title, the body, and the user ID. Now remember, in Laravel, we don't actually write MySQL code ourselves. We use something called a model, which makes it really easy to perform database actions for us. So remember, in our app folder and then in the models folder, we have a user model, but right now let's go ahead and create a blog post model or a post model. So just open up your secondary command line and type this in with me. PHP artisan make : model, and then just name it uppercase post. Go ahead and press enter. Okay, and now in that models folder, we have this brand new file called post.php. So check this out. Still within our post controller, right? Watch how easy it is now to save this entry into the database. Literally, all we have to say is uppercase post, that's the name of our model, : create, semicolon, and then you just give it our incoming fields array. Laravel will see this and it will write the SQL statement to actually save that into the database. Now, let's not forget we need to import our model, so right-click on uppercase post here and click import class. Awesome, up at the top you can see it automatically imported that for us. Let's go ahead and save this file, and then I will let you know that you're going to need to go into that brand new model file. So in the models folder, go into post.php, and actually, just so if you ever see this error message, it's not scary, let's run into the error message on purpose first. So if I refresh this screen and try to submit a blog post, we see this error screen, and the reason we're seeing this is because in our post controller, we didn't spell out each field value one by one. We just gave it the big incoming array. So in order to be able to conveniently just pass it this one single array value like this, all you need to do is go into your brand new post model, and inside the class here, so in the curly brackets right below this use has factory, just say protected $fillable equals, and then an array, semicolon, and just spell out these values with me. So quotes title, comma, quotes body, comma, quotes user_ID. Go ahead and save that, and now if you go back in your browser and actually fill this out, so I'll say, my first post, and for the body content, I will say the sky is blue, and I click save new post. Awesome, we get taken to this URL. It says, hey, but if you look in the database, so in Workbench, if I click this icon for the post table, beautiful. It's the first post, so its ID is 1, but it stores when we created it. There's the title value, the body value, and the Brad user of 1 for the user ID. Now that we have these basics up and running, in our next lesson, we can work on form validation messages, permissions, redirects, and more when it comes to creating blog posts. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you then.